Friday. Welcome, everybody. This is Brad Haskamp with the Minnesota Department of Education with my wonderful Minnesota Department of Education team. And today we are going to be talking about some Minnesota Adult Education System updates, specifically all the acronyms you can think of: IET, WIOA, accountability, and professional development. I do want to make a special note at the start of this webinar. This is not one of our system-wide COVID-19 update sessions. This session today is an updated version of our session that we had planned for spring regionals. So we want to make that very clear from the get-go that this is not a system COVID-19 session. But hopefully you're here and excited to talk about IET, WIOA, accountability, and professional development on this sunny Friday morning. My name again is Brad Haskamp. I'm the Adult Secondary Credential and Education Policy Specialist. Julie, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Julie Dinko, the Transition Specialist.
Thank you, Julie. And Astrid?
This is Astrid Leiden, the Professional Development Specialist. Good morning, everyone.
Thanks, Astrid. We will have this presentation uploaded to mnabe.org. It will also be on the Literacy Action Network website if you click on State EB presentations. I will caution you now, though, it is not there, but all of the materials, as always, can be found in the Materials tab on your dashboard on your computer right now. We will be taking questions at the end of each section today. When we get to the question slides, you can either type in your questions using the webinar's chat function, or you can click to raise your hand, and then we'll unmute you and you can ask your question over the phone or your headset during the question periods when you're unmuted. I want to give a special thank you to Carla Vian from Literacy Action Network for providing technical assistance today. If you have any technical assistance needs or questions about this webinar, please let Carla know and she'll be happy to help. As I noted before, the resources from this webinar and other communications that we've been giving can be found online at mnabe.org if you look for the tab for State AB presentations on the left-hand side towards the bottom. We have 5 big topics that we're hoping to share with you today: high school equivalency, transitions programming, WIOA updates, data policy and accountability, and some professional development. Before we launch into that, though, we do have an exciting announcement that our grant application session, Jody has worked hard to create a new format for our grant application session this year because of the cancellation of the regionals. She has recorded the grant application session into as 6 short videos, and those can be found on mnabe.org /State AB presentations with the link on the screen. Please note that you cannot typically see these with Internet Explorer. You probably need to use Chrome or Firefox in order to access those videos. But those are great videos that can help you as you're trying to fill out that grant application, the grant application materials. We will be also having the live version or live webinar version of our annual grant application workshop as our next web chat, which is Wednesday, May 6th from 1 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. And you can see the link to register on the screen. Both of these links are also in your materials tab. So let's launch into our first topic, which is high school equivalency. Want to give you a brief update on GED testing. That GED testing is exploring the possibility of launching remote testing. The earliest that this will be available is mid to late May. And what that means is a tester could potentially take the test at home on their computer or laptop. As we launch into this, we would prioritize students that either had 1 test left, students that have a job offer, testers that are entering the military, and have some documented need where they need to complete that test immediately. Those students would be prioritized for this remote testing option. The proctors would not be our current GED testing center staff. This would actually be new staff hired as online proctors, hired by a company here in Minnesota called OnView. And that will create potentially some job opportunities for those of you that are GED test administrators or would like to be GED test administrators, where you could potentially apply for this as an option. We are also exploring the idea of paper testing, especially in some of the correctional areas that are still operating with social distancing. I would like to caution that the paper testing with the current GED test is not like the 2002 series. It would not be that GED test centers or jails or prisons would have a bunch of paper tests that they would order in advance. This would be something that you would that the student would need to order at least 10 days in advance with the testing center. We would need to help, myself and GED testing service staff would need to be involved in doing that single paper testing session and orchestrating that. It is a specially printed test specific to that individual student or tester. And then those need to be immediately administered, and then the test would need to be turned in or sent back via courier to GED testing service for scoring. It's a much more individualized and complex procedure than the 2002 series paper testing. And so for that reason, and it would be used in only small cases where that would be a documented need. And right now we're specifically thinking that would potentially happen in corrections in some cases. As you have ideas or questions about those GED testing updates, please let me know and send me questions. We'll also take some questions at the end of this section. I also want to remind folks that the GED Age Waiver does have CASA's goals added to it as an option. That was revised on February 20th, so that is great. We also will have, we also still have the GED Ready and Table 1112 options for that. But obviously those are a little tough to administer. Many of those are tough to administer right now. Of those, when our schools are currently closed, the one option that we have is with GED Ready. That is something that can be done. So if you are not aware, you can be proctoring GED Ready tests for age waiver purposes. And the way that you could do that, the two main reasons that we've been discussing with programs is one, to either train an on-site adult like a parent to be the proctor, or where you as an ADE program person or a GED testing center person would remotely proctor the test with either the same device or a separate device, where you would have a video software tool, online software tool, to actually monitor and proctor the test. And so you can see a couple options there with your laptop, smartphone, tablet, etc., using Zoom or some other software that provides video conferencing. But we are also open to other ideas as well as you do GED Ready proctoring for the age waiver. And if you're thinking you want to train an on-site adult, like a parent, to be the proctor, some things that the proctor would need to be able to do and you'd want to make sure you include in the training. The proctor must be able to watch the test, the complete test from beginning to end. The proctor must know what is and is not allowed during testing, such as the use of devices, use of recording devices, which materials the student could have with them while they're testing. The proctor must also verify that the tester did not use a device or resource tool that is not allowed during testing. They must check that the student is not recording the test questions or responses and assure that the tester did not cheat in some other way. We also want to remind folks we're getting questions about the GED subsidy. So currently there is some funding left in the GED subsidy because of the school shutdown. I will say from July to, not January, but February, we used more than 80% of the subsidies. So more than 200,000 of the 245,000 has been spent. We have a little bit more than $43,000 left. And that subsidy hopefully will, once we get back up and running, or with GED testing centers up and running again, that subsidy can be spent out by the end of the year, and maybe it would last through the end of this fiscal year, which would be the end of June. The subsidy is continued to get reapproved and to have the same amount of funding, $245,000, for free GED testing starting again July of 2020. But if there are any changes with the legislature, we would let you know, but that is currently the plan thus far. I also wanted to let people know that the competition for the high Cs, the high school equivalency assessments, which test or test plural we will or will not approve, is happening. We have a final draft now of the application materials. They will be posted soon. We have all but one of our official scores selected, and we anticipate that results for this competition will be announced to the AD field by July. So stay tuned. It's exciting that this is moving forward and coming to a completion here soon. So that is a couple of the key updates with high school equivalency. So at this point, we're going to take some questions. Astrid, I'm going to hope that you can help me out with some of the questions in the chat function here.
Yes, absolutely. And we have several. First, I do want to quickly mention, I'm going to thank Lee for noting that the link that we posted for the April 30th webinar in the materials section is not the correct link. We mistakenly put the link to the May 6th webinar, so please do not use that link to register. You have two options. We do have the correct link on the Atlas PD calendar, and we'll also be sending an email announcement about that webinar early next week, so you can also wait until that comes through to get registered. So thanks for noting that for us. So Brad, our first set of questions has to do with costs related to remote GED testing. Questions about the cost for that, questions about overnight mailing. Can you speak to that?
Yep. So the cost for which testing?
Remote
testing?
Remote GED testing that is going to be put in place later this spring.
Yep. So the cost has not yet been determined whether that will be the same cost or whether that would be an increased cost. So we do not yet know the answer to that. GED Testing Service has not announced the details to that yet. So I think that will be a little bit a wait and see as GED Testing Center or Service works through the details of their contract with OnView and through the procedures. So stay tuned on that aspect.
Okay.
And then you said something about printing for a paper option.
Well, the mailing costs related to the printed option.
Oh, so in the printed option for the paper version in an individualized, individually approved paper version of the test, in a case like that, I would need to be involved. The cost itself is the same as a regular GED test, even though it is more expensive to administer.
Okay, thanks, Brad. And then a related question to GED testing, a comment and a concern coming from Renata. It's a hard place for a program to be in that we have a GED tester on our payroll who would not be able to do the proctoring at a distance unless she got hired by a different entity. Is that the correct interpretation?
That is absolutely correct, and that is, I agree with that wholeheartedly. That is why I'm hoping that folks could get hired on, for those that aren't able to work, could get hired on by OnView to do that. Of course, that's not going to be a perfect option in every case, but hopefully then they could replace as many hours as possible with the OnView work instead of the St. Paul work. With you having contracts with your staff that might be doing that, I agree this is a challenging situation, and we'll see how it unfolds in the month of May and over the course of the summer and beyond.
Okay, thanks. And then Brad, if you could go back to the slide about remote guidelines for remote proctoring of the GED Ready. Someone was interested in seeing that. And then a question about age waiver cut scores. Do the cost of school scores need to be on a certain test form, and can we combine goals and GED Ready scores in order to obtain the age waiver? For example, math on one, reading on another.
Yep. So here I have the GED Ready proctor requirements on the screen. I encourage you not to be writing down what is on the screen right now, but to download what is the slides in the materials tab. That should be in the materials tab, I hope. That made it in time. Astrid, those are in there, correct?
Yes, they are. The slides are in there.
Okay, the slides are in there. Wonderful. So these are the requirements. Just basically, how can you? We're looking to make sure that people can watch the entire testing session, to make sure that the tester does not cheat by using a device or another person or some other unallowed material, and that they don't record the session. So those are some key things that we're looking for. In terms of the scores for what can be allowed for the GED age waiver, these are the scores that are allowed. This is also can be found if you download the GED age waiver at the Minnesota Department of Education website. On that site or in the instructions, it also does allow, and it does say that you can mix and match GED Ready scores with CASA's Goals scores with TABE. So you could do a reading score with the GED Ready and maybe a math score with CASA's Goals or vice versa. So you can mix and match those. The form, you must have a valid score in the test that is given. The only time where you'd be selecting forms is for TABE or CASA's. For TABE 1112, it has been designated as a Form A. For CASA's Goals, we did not designate a form.
Great, thanks, Brad. Then a couple of questions about the subsidy. If there is subsidy money left over after this year, can it be carried over to next year?
Unfortunately, no. That money is allocated during a fiscal year by the legislature to the Department of Education, and we contract with our testing vendor to release that. We cannot use that or hold that funding for another year. So whatever we use this year, we use this year. Whatever we don't use this year is lost or it's brought into the state general fund overall.
Okay, and then can the subsidy be used to pay for new remote testing costs?
The subsidy could pay for a full battery of a GED test, potentially. Yes, I would think that it would, but if the cost of the remote testing is greater, it may or may not cover that. I think that I don't think that they said put a limit as $120. So I think it could still cover one full battery, even under remote testing, even if that cost is increased.
Okay, great. And then finally, do we have contact information for OnView?
For OnView, not at this time.
Okay.
We're waiting for GED Testing Service to make an official announcement with their OnView partner. And as that gets released, then we will be forwarding that on to all of you via email so that you could forward that to appropriate staff.
Excellent. Great. I think we've got all of the high school equivalency questions answered at this point. I think we can move on to our next section.
Excellent.
And if people do come up with other questions, we have some open time at the very end to answer questions about any of the topics.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Astrid. And thanks to all of you for your great questions. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Julie Dinkow from our team to talk about transitions programming. Julie.
Thank you, Brad. I just noticed that Jill did type in one more GED one, so let's get that one out of the way. It's one more. Can you tell us when remote testing might be available?
Yep, I can say that when remote testing will be available, we will be contacting or sending emails and making sure everyone knows. I also know that GED Testing Service will be sending out emails to all of their contacts. So look for your emails for those exact dates. We do not yet know when the exact date will be for Minnesota.
All right, thank you, Brad. Good morning, everyone. I am going to cover the transitions programming, and mostly this is going to focus on integrated education and training. Next slide. So just a quick review. In 2014, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act passed. That's been nearly 6 years ago. And when it passed, there were 3 new activities that were allowable under the law for adult basic education providers to offer. It was integrated English literacy and civics education, workforce preparation activities, and integrated education and training. Next slide. So what they were looking for in the rulemaking, I don't know if any of you remember that, but people could send in comments, suggestions regarding what was proposed in the law. And the federal office came back. People asked, well, why did you add these 3 new activities to adult basic education services? And their response is on this slide. And what I added the underlined emphasis in that basically it's offering educators new opportunities to enhance and expand engagement efforts with employers so that adult education services meet the needs of job seekers and employers. And that's one thing I want to stress, especially now, because chances are we're in a recession and we'll be in a stronger recession, and we need to focus on this. Next slide. So, how does integrated education and training benefit the adult basic education learner? And a simple way to put what's in this slide is that it's moving from a sequential model into a model where they're not only getting their adult basic education skills, they're also getting training for employment. Next slide. So overall, across the nation, many states are embracing this and really moving ahead with this work. This is national data, and it shows how much IET grew across the states from program year 2016 to 2017. There was a tremendous increase in IET programming. And it just indicates that here in Minnesota, I think we're going to do a lot more work around IET and promotion of IET. Next slide. So this is the definition in the federal law. I think many of you have looked at it, and some of you have a really good understanding of it, but there are several different pieces that make up an IET approach. Next slide. So the first portion is that most of you know that IET includes adult education classes, workforce preparation classes, and workforce training or occupational training. And those have to be offered simultaneously. They can't be in that sequential order that I spoke about earlier. That's the whole point of IET, is that people do not necessarily have the time to be staying in classes for months and years. I believe the average hours an adult basic education learner stays here in Minnesota is around 120 hours. So in that 120 hours, what can we do to keep them engaged so that not only are we increasing their adult basic education skills, but we're also giving them occupational skills that will allow them to get a decent paying job. The second part of IET is a single set of learning objectives. And I think most adult basic education educators know how to create learning objectives, but what they're looking for here is a single set of learning objectives that include adult ed, workforce prep, and workforce training. And when I look at IET, or what has been offered as IET across the state of Minnesota, I think this is the one piece that is really missing. And I realize that because I think part of that is due to the fact that it's difficult sometimes to get the trainer, the person that you're working with to offer the training, to engage in developing this. And then the other piece of it is that IET has to fit into a career pathway, meaning that it's a career pathway where a learner can advance. They can stop in and stop out of training, but in the long run, they're advancing along their career pathway. And that can be leveraged in your local and state WIOA plans. And I emphasize that because now those plans are currently being written. They're due at the end of June. You can take the approach that this is just a rubber stamp thing and we're going to fill in the same thing that we did last time. Or you can engage with the people around the table and say, no, we have a recession here. We need to do more for these individuals. What can we do together to make sure that they're getting the training they need? Next slide. These are the instructional components. If you're a teacher or a program manager, you might want to check these off as I go through them to make sure you have them. Almost everyone has adult education and literacy activities down. I think we do that well in Minnesota. We do a very good job of that. And as far as embedding workforce preparation activities, I put ACEs in here. It also includes North Star digital literacy. And I think we've done a very good job, again, in Minnesota of promoting ACEs long before the federal government came along and said workforce prep is now allowable. ACEs was doing that work. North Star digital literacy is great in building those digital literacy skills, which are part of workforce preparation. And then finally, the final piece is workforce training. I put Minnesota State's logo here, but it really is looking at any training that is accessible for adult basic education learners. We try to leverage partnerships with the community colleges, mostly because they have the Pell Grant and funding opportunities, but that doesn't always work. We realize that doesn't always work. And so there are other training partners in your communities that you can work with, whether that's a community-based organization or, for instance, training an ABE teacher on staff to become a ServSafe proctor or trainer. And then they serve not only as the adult basic education instructor, but also as the occupational skills instructor. And remember, these three have to be offered concurrently, contextually, and with a single set of learning objectives. Next slide. So what have we been doing in Minnesota? Our approach was we didn't really know what existed in Minnesota. So we wanted a baseline of what we thought might be IET programs and what people thought might be IET programs, and we asked them to enter them into SID. Since then, that's been about a year and a half, the federal office has given us further guidance regarding credentials and what counts. And so now we're trying to tighten that, that model a little more in Minnesota. They also held a national conference where other states were sharing some of their best practices, so we've adopted some of those. But just so you're aware, there's still a substantial variation across the nation as far as what IET looks like. Next slide. So moving forward with it, I want to ensure that the reporting we do to the federal office this year is as accurate as it can be. So the state team developed an Iet Quick Checklist, and that's in your materials. And if any of the elements on that checklist are missing, it's not an IET program. And then we also created an IET approval form, which has a set of directions to go with it. And so if you have a program that meets the Iet Quick Checklist, then move on to complete the IET approval form. Next slide. So step 1, does your program already offer IET? Use the checklist to determine that. Next slide. Step 2, then complete the IET approval form, submit it to us. The state team will review it. If it is approved, enter the IET into SID. That's ongoing. We will have to look back to IETs that have started since July 1st of this year. So we're reviewing those as well. Next slide. If you do have an IET in your program, please go into SID and make sure it starts with IET. And I've given some examples here of what is currently listed in SID as IET. And these are good examples if you're looking for what it should look like. If it isn't IET, do not remove the class. It has to be renamed. Please contact Jenny Schluckebier or Mary Zimmerly at Urban Planet, or you can contact me and I will send you the screenshots on how to do that. Next slide. This is what a single set of learning objectives must entail, and I think I covered that already. So if you want to go to the next slide, Brad. We were going to hold a workshop where people could work on this single set of learning objectives together. Due to COVID, it has been canceled, but just so you're aware, we're currently working on another offering of some sort, so people have the opportunity to do this. Next slide. So as far as the credential piece, we did get clarification that ServSafe does qualify as a credential, an IET credential, but it has to be built into a career pathway that ends in an industry recognized post-secondary credential. And so I gave the example here of American National Standards Institute. And then if you go to the next slide, there are a few more examples of what counts as an IET, only if it's embedded in a career pathway that ends in a credential. Okay, next slide. Any programs about IET? Yeah.
Yep, I was just going to open it up for questions. People can feel free to chat in their questions or click to raise their hand and we'll call on them.
I should clarify, Jenny mentioned that changing the name of the class, but you also need to tag a class with the IET label. If you have questions, you can contact me, but I do ask that program managers especially go into their programming and check what's labeled as IET, because currently there are several classes that are in that IET report and tagged as IET that clearly are not IET.
So, Julie, we have a question about what counts as an IET class from Allison Wilcox. She asks, so a bridge class is IET if it leads to a CNA?
Yeah. You have to have, I kind of, when I look at this, I get rid of what has traditionally been seen as an on-ramp or bridge or team teaching. I remove all those labels. I look at the quick checklist. I see, does it have these components? And if it does, then it would be IET. So yes, Allison, that would be IET. if it's occurring, I mean, you have to look at the checklist, if it's occurring simultaneously, etc.
Great. We have another or a question from Laura Malat. Will we be able to do all this remotely, no longer hybrid, unless we are permitted back to our site?
Do you mean doing integrated education and training? There are some programs I just found out yesterday that are doing this remotely. They're offering it through, I think, Zoom. And I'm trying to think of some of the other ITV, and well, I know of those two for sure. Yep.
I'm guessing it would maybe depend on the pathway or the class and the content.
Yes, it definitely would. There's some that, you know, the skills portion has to be hands-on, and obviously that would not be permissible at this time. Yeah.
And we will be having,
like Allison Wilcox.
I'm sorry, Brad. We'll be having a webinar on May 14th. I'll put this in the chat at 1 o'clock, sharing what programs are doing to move their adult career pathways forward at a distance.
Excellent. We have a question from Tom. He's asking, please talk about how some things that are not NRS outcomes and in and of themselves, such as North Star certificates, can be reported as IET progress measures, as per Judy Mortrude.
Well, I would have to look into that, but my understanding is adult basic education does not have the ability to track progress measures at this point. I think it's our other titles that are doing that. It's something I definitely am pushing federally, and I know there are a few other national directors that are also pushing this, simply because that's where our adult basic education learners are at. Not all, obviously, I'm speaking generally, but that they need to be given credit for incremental progress. And I think that's hopefully something we're going to see in the future.
Wonderful. Esther, I think that's everything from the chat. Anything else you're seeing?
Nope, that's it.
Great. Well, Julie, let's move on. It continues with you to talk about other WIOA updates.
Okay. All right. Next slide, please. So I've already mentioned this. Just a reminder that there are local and regional workforce development plans, and they are due July 1st. We are one of the 6 core programs under WIOA, and there will be a place for ABE board representatives to sign on the local plans. Next slide. If you want to look at your current regional and local plan, you can go to this link here, or just Google DEED WIOA local regional plans, and they're combined. So your regional plan will pop up first, and then your local plan will be later in the document. Next slide. So the regional plan is really a broader plan made up of several local, areas. But how does ABE participate in that? Well, we I think lead the way in sector partnerships and career pathway strategies and stakeholder engagement. Local boards are led by employers. As I mentioned earlier, WIOA is very focused on engaging employers and providing job skills, training, and employment for the clients that we serve. And so on the broad level, The regional plan will address career pathway strategies. And when you're sitting at that table on your local board or you're talking to your local rep, I believe that ABE really is a leader in this area because many of the other titles have not received training in career pathways, have not been working in career pathways. So this is really an opportunity for adult basic education to become involved. Next slide. Then there is the local plan, and the local plan obviously lists the career force locations, and adult basic education is a service provided by a career force location. And so what you might want to think about now before those are submitted is the career pathways you're thinking on offering. Can you co-enroll with Title I Youth or any other titles? There's information about ESL and GED. And then there's question 22, which describes how your local board would coordinate with adult basic education and literacy. And that is where you could really leverage integrated education and training and what you are offering around integration, education, and training, because that's where it involves all the other titles. Next slide.
Okay, Julie, I think this
Yep.
one, then it
Yep.
transitions over to me.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing we're working on is reporting IET occupational training costs. This is a federal requirement. We have to submit this in October. So when we start talking about our August 1st submission that we're going to need from every consortium, we are going to be we will be asking about your IET program training costs. And just please note that the training costs in IET are not the entire operating cost of running the IT, but it's really just what you're estimating as the actual cost for occupational training, the occupational component, not the adult education component and not the workforce preparation component, just the occupational component. You can make any kind of it's going to be an estimate because it is kind of funny that they want this deeply integrated report or service approach, yet they really want to know the cost of one isolated piece of that when it's meant to be integrated. So it's a little difficult, and if it's challenging at your end, we understand, and we ask that you estimate to your best ability. Look for more guidance coming from us soon on that. There are some examples though that we can provide right now about training costs. So for example, if your ABE provider is hiring a registered nurse to provide the hands-on training for CNA, the cost for that nurse should be reported as training costs. With example B, an ABE provider pays a student to go to a specific occupational training. That could be counted as an occupational cost. And if you have an ABE teacher teaching a ServSafe class, the time that teacher has spent teaching the ServSafe class and what you're paying that teacher for that time could count as occupational training costs. And again, here we could give some guidance that if it's too difficult to determine the approximate percentage of time spent on the training component, then you can estimate 50% of the IET as your training costs and enter those when we ask for those. Okay, so at this point, let's open it up for some questions on our WIOA update.
So Brad, one question that's come in, I think related to the reporting the training costs, is this reporting tied to future funding?
No, this is simply a cost that we are expected to submit to the feds. It does not affect a local consortium's amount of funding for the future, and it does not affect how much funding we get in adult education funding as a state.
Great, thanks. Not seeing any other questions coming in. We can give people just a minute. Again, feel free to raise your hand or chat in the box. And Eric looking for some clarification. So we only report costs if we provide occupational training. If a partner provides it, we don't report. That is correct.
Yep, you have to be using adult basic education funds in order to be able to count that as training costs. If you're doing IET programming and your partner is picking up 100% of the training costs and you report zero, that's not something to say that's a bad thing. That actually means you're doing it as effectively as possible, and that might be a good thing. Any other questions on this section?
No questions coming in. We can, one more question here. So if we pay for ServSafe books or online courses to go with our training, that is considered training costs?
Yes.
Another question that we might need a little more information, Nadine. What if we have grants appropriation money for some of our IET classes?
Julie, I'm going to have you jump in and help me out with this. But my understanding is that we're really only tracking occupational training costs when you're using ABE funding for that training. It does not count for other grants that you might be getting. Correct, Julie?
Yes, that's correct. They're just trying to get an understanding of how many AFLA or ABE dollars are spent on training.
So if, for example, you have a P2P grant and you're using those funds, that would not be counted in this tracking, correct?
Correct.
And Karen's clarifying, if we're using regional transitions funds, that is federal. Yes, that is correct.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yep. And Patty asked, what about transitions funds? So yep, that is regional transitions funds. That would count. Okay. Maybe let's move to the next section. We'll have time for additional questions at the end. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Astrid. Yep. Our next section is about data, policy, and accountability. First, we want to remind folks about the federal public charge rule. We've had some folks ask questions about that as their students are applying for green cards. And it's important to know that there are a lot of things, that benefits that are included in that public charge test, and you can see the list there. Most of them include cash or resources that the student or that the person is receiving. Adult education is not included in that list. And it's important to note as well that skills learned and certificates earned while participating in adult education would actually help a person applying for a green card in that situation. So that would adult education can hopefully help in this situation as the federal people do their analysis or do that federal public charge. We also wanted to remind folks about the current and prior month data entry window in SID that will be starting next month. We will want all May 2020 hours entered by the end of June, and that is student hours and student test scores. And that will continue into June and beyond. Some of the benefits that we noted before, this allows us to make sure that we can adhere to our federal requirements and to our state funding requirements in terms of making sure that we have the appropriate data in. It prevents consortia from having to do contact hour or table A adjustments down the road, which has happened many years in a row or several different years. It also then allows local programs not to get caught where their students missed out on testing opportunities or where programs were unable to count hours because they had hit that 12-hour cap because they had worked for a couple hours in another program and that program didn't get those hours in advance. So there are a lot of benefits to why we're reasons why we're implementing this data entry window. We will also note that there's some news with remote NRS testing. Best Plus is able to do remote testing. If you have any questions about that, our state assessment trainers can help. Linda Keller has been looking into this. on how that can work. We also, though, know that not a lot of programs are doing Best Plus testing. We know that CASAS does not have remote testing available now, but they are working on it, and they are looking at these possibilities. So stay tuned with CASAS. And with TABE, TABE 1112 is not yet available for remote testing where students could test from home, but they are working out an option. However, it will not be available for at least another month or two at the earliest. And that would go through an online proctoring system, much like what I was explaining with GED testing, with how they would do remote testing. One thing that TABE is opening up, though, is their locator. They are allowing anyone with an on-site, DRC on-site account, and that is anyone that is doing TABE 1112 testing via computer, or do scanning official score forms in to TABE, to the TABE website, and download and to have those automatically scored by a DRC. So if you're doing either of those options, you likely already have a DRC Insight account, I should say, not on-site, but a DRC Insight account. And then you will be able to assign students at their homes a way to take the locator. You'd be able to email them a test ticket, and they could take it. To explain what that proctoring must look like and how to give those locators out, DRC is sending out a guide on effective proctoring for the testing, for the locator testing. So stay tuned and look for that if you have a DRC Insight account. And I will also note that those locators will be free. They will not be charging people to take the locators. Remember, a locator is just the gauge to know which test you're going to be giving folks. So the locator does not count as an official pretest. However, it will help DRC is hoping this will help them learn how to do TABE 1112 remote testing and help with other things here in the future. So it gives us some information to go from and gives hopefully you some information to go from initially. We also want to make sure that people are keeping in mind some of our upcoming trainings. We have not trainings, but sessions. We have a session on intaking new students under this situation. How do you conduct intake at a distance? We have a webinar with a lot of ABE program staff that will be sharing on Tuesday, April 21st from 10 to 11:15 in the morning. You can see the registration link there. And this will be a chance to share how programs are doing registration virtually or orienting students virtually at a distance. We also want to announce that we are exploring lifting the 12-hour restriction in SID for new students with no pretest during the school closure period. If we do this, these students' hours would count for state ABE funding, but likely would not count for federal ABE funding. However, we have not made the official decision yet, and we will be providing more information by the end of April. We do have a COVID-19 and ABE update webinar plan for Thursday, April 30th from 10 to 11:30 in the morning, and we encourage you to check that out. We also want to remind folks about the 40-hour waiver. Most programs are not using this 40-hour waiver at this point. In fact, I don't think any program is at this point. But we did want to quickly remind folks that the waiver still exists for those that want to test a student, are able to test a student with fewer than 40 contact hours. But you need to make sure that that student has finished instruction and they need to reach a goal and the student has left ABE. We're not going to really spend a lot of time about how this looks, but we do want to make sure that if you do use this here in the future, you want to make sure you're tracking who approved the waiver and the name of the secondary college-ready occupational assessment or credential or the college course that is completing at that time. We also wanted to let people know that as the COVID-19, the stay-at-home closures are lifted in the future, once schools are coming back together and ABE programs are coming back together, you cannot just create a mass waiver for all of your students as they come back to do any testing at that time. So you cannot create a test waiver for all of your students when you're restarting in-person classes for those that have less than 40 hours because they don't meet those criteria. You can, of course, still test any students that have 40 or more contact or proxy hours as you normally would, but you should not be creating a special testing waiver when you reconvene for all of your returning students. A lot of these FAQs we have been sharing in other sessions as well, and they will be available on the slides. We also want to let people know that you can directly potentially upload your testing data into SID if you're doing computer-based testing or scanning test scoring sheets. And you can contact our SID support team at support@mnab.org for more information on that for TABE and CASA's data entry into SID. We also will be talking about or sharing information about bulk purchasing of computer-based tests. That information will be coming soon. We anticipate that information will be coming out after schools have started back up again and or once remote testing options have been announced. But we would do this for CASA's enhanced or potentially CASA's basic testing and TABE testing. Okay, so let's open it up to questions. Astrid, can you help me out again with the question log?
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to kind of go back to the beginning of this question period. So the first question was, is there any move toward making the program year and the contact hour accounting year dates the same? Moving them both to July 1 to June 30.
So at this point, we are not looking at making those the same because we need to make sure that we can announce how much funding you have starting July 1. If we made the July to June contact or years the same in terms of the contact hour reporting period and the federal program year, we would need to probably backdate either we wouldn't be able to announce your funding to you until several months into the fiscal year, or we would have to use second prior year. So we'd use the contact hours for this time period now that we're currently in to help determine your 2022 hours your 2022 funding. So, and many programs don't want that much that year-long delay. So, and they don't want a delay in announcing how much funding they get as a program. So with those two factors, at this point, we do not anticipate merging those two dates into the same period.
Thanks, Brad. Another question about who is using Best Plus and if there are any advantages over CASAS and TABE. I believe the only ABE program I'm aware of that's using the Best Plus is Metro North. I don't know if you know of others, Brad, but Linda Keller and Teresa Zingery would be folks to contact to get their perspectives on that test.
Absolutely. And we do know that that the main reason that other programs had not initially opted into Best Plus is because the Best Plus test is a one-on-one test, one proctor with one tester in front of it with a computer. And many programs in the past had felt that that was not a sustainable testing model, and so they liked the option of being able to give tests to an entire classroom all at once or to a large group all at once, as is the option with CASAS and TABE. Yep, but I agree. The only program I know of is Metro North, so Teresa Zingery and Linda Keller would be the best experts in our state on that test.
Great. Another question from Betsy. What are programs doing for testing and reporting for programs that need to report to DEED? I don't know if Julie, if you want to chime in or if other programs want to chime in on the chat to that question.
Sure. I think DEED is going to come out with guidance basically saying use your best judgment. You'll have to come up with some documentation on how you're going to determine the educational level. But I was talking to Ann Kukulski, and that's what they were sort of thinking on proposing. They fully realize that, I mean, their programs as well are stuck because they relied on the TABE for many of their assessments as well. So there will be flexibility around that. Does that answer your question, or do you want further guidance?
And let folks maybe enter their thoughts in the chat. We can come back to it.
Okay.
Marty is letting everyone know that there will be a webinar on Wednesday, April 22nd, devoted to an update on CASAS remote testing, and she put the link to that in the chat. So if people are interested, they can attend that, and we'll certainly be keeping up to date on that information and sharing anything that is relevant to our state out through our distribution lists. Jill, looking for clarification on lifting the 12-hour restriction in SID time frame. So that would not be a retroactive lift, Jill. That would be looking forward, most likely beginning May 1st. Brad, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yep. Nope. We would look at implementing this starting May 1st. You're absolutely correct, Astrid.
So should I just talk a little more about the WIOA and TABE requirements there?
Sure. Yeah, concern about not being able, workforce partners not being able to pay for tuition without a TABE in place.
That, yes, and I can bring these concerns back to Dean. My understanding is that guidance would be going out. The issue is, I looked into people on our last webinar, people submitted all different types of suggestions as to how we could get a grade equivalent for a student. And so I took those suggestions, I compiled them into a list, and I started doing the research on them. And all of them have copyright data practices around it. So you cannot, and security practices. So you cannot mail a hard copy to individuals because that would go against it. And they currently do not have remote virtual testing options available. That doesn't even take into account the numerous individuals who don't have access to digital literacy, Wi-Fi, or don't know how to use the technology. So they're aware of that. And last week, my understanding was they were going to give guidance to the partners regarding that. I will follow up and see if that won't be going out, but I don't see how they could hold up training costs simply because during the situation we're currently in. But I will follow up. I think that's Karen and Teresa. So I can follow up with you, Karen, because you asked specifically about not being able, they can't use their training dollars unless they have a grade equivalent. And maybe it's just a matter of defining a process of how you came about a grade equivalent for that particular learner without using a standardized assessment.
Yeah. And I do know we will have some staff from the Hub Center sharing on our webinar on Tuesday on the intake at a distance, talking about how they are using the diagnostic and read theory to come up with an approximate level for placement for students within distance learning platforms. Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions here, so I think we can move on.
Sounds good. Well, at that point then, we're turning it over to you, Astrid, to talk about professional development.
Excellent. Thanks, Brad. Let's go to the next slide. So just a reminder, if you've been on our other webinars recently, you've heard this before, but just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the relatively new Schoology group that we set up to support the field around COVID-19 and a quick transition to distance education. This is here is a place to centralize the many resources that are being shared around COVID-19 and its impact on our programs, and really to facilitate the sharing of questions and resources among folks in the field. So if you have not yet joined this, really encourage you to do so. Brad, if you go to the next slide, you can get a little taste of what you can find there. We've set up a number of discussion threads and resource folders for sharing, so you can hone in on the area of your questions or the resources that you're looking for. If you would want some more detailed information about how to navigate this platform or access it, you can go back to the slides from our April 3rd webinar, where you can get some additional information, or you can contact me. So please head over there and share what's working for you, and share your questions with the rest of the field and the support network. And just seeing a chat coming in from Amy about having trouble getting into Schoology. Yes, that has been an issue with so many K-12 systems moving to Schoology as their primary form of reaching their students. So my only advice is to be persistent, and I do feel like generally the early to mid-morning time has been the most challenging when so many K-12 students may be logging in. So just try again, and I know that Schoology is working to try to address some of those issues. And if you need something immediately and you're not able to get in, please just shoot me an email and we'll try to get you the resources that you need. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Also want to make sure that people are aware of a new professional development resource available to you. One of the frequent comments that we heard from folks in the field was the desire to have all of our professional development opportunities listed in one place, not just the ones that are currently scheduled in the calendar, but a more comprehensive list that you can use for your program professional development planning, and that individuals can use to identify professional development that meets their needs. So really excited about this new platform that was a collaborative effort among all of our support network providers, and headed up by Marisa Giesler at Atlas. Huge thank you to Marisa for spearheading this project. If you've not yet been onto the catalog, encourage you to head on over there. The link is right here. It's a really usable format that allows you to search by specific content area, format of professional development, particular audience or provider. So take a look at that. You can use it as you're thinking about your professional development plans for next year. Go to the next slide. Also, want to let people know that we've made a quick shift this spring, moving from a variety of in-person professional development events, including our regional events, to holding everything at a distance. And again, a huge thank you to Atlas and the other support network providers who have made this happen very quickly. So one of the things that we've been doing is gathering folks around particular content areas or settings to share what you are doing to manage teaching in this difficult time and at a distance. And we've had a number of coffee breaks happen so far. If you've not been on those, there has been some excellent sharing. I'm just really wowed by the innovative and resourceful strategies that people all around the state are using to reach and support their students. So you can find comprehensive notes from the virtual coffee break that have already happened. Those are archived on our COVID site. And then encourage you to join one in the future. We've got another one this afternoon on using volunteers to support learners at a distance, and then a couple next week as well. And there is a link in the materials section with the full list of coffee breaks and webinars, and you can register for all of these on the Atlas calendar. On the next slide, we also have some more formal webinars on a variety of topics. We've got the full list here. We've moved some of the sessions that were going to be held at regionals into a virtual format to ensure that people have an opportunity to meet some of their relicensure needs, as well as some other timely topics. So again, that full list of dates and times is in your materials tab. Let's go to the next slide. One event that has not been canceled and is going to be offered as a virtual conference, we're really excited about this, is our May 8th CCRS Instructional Leadership Summit. So this professional development opportunity is an opportunity for those of you who are working in instructional leadership roles in your programs, or who plan to support colleagues around implementing the college and career readiness standards. So this is an opportunity to come together. We'll be sharing a variety of new materials and resources that are designed to be used at the program level for professional development around CCRS, sharing some workshop and meeting facilitation tips. You'll be hearing from our CCRS leads around troubleshooting specific ELA and math issues and questions, and supporting colleagues with selecting materials and designing lessons. So this will be a 9 to 1:30 event with breaks. So we hope that you'll encourage those folks on your teams who are doing this work to join us for this opportunity. And then looking ahead to next year, we'll go to the next slide. We will be running another CCRS implementation cohort. So as a reminder, this is a year-long professional development to help teams from programs develop a CCRS implementation plan to learn how to evaluate lessons and materials for alignment to the standards and conduct observations to support teachers with standards implementation. It's a team-based cohort with ideally one administrator and at least one ELA and math teacher participating. That application is currently available on the Atlas website. It has a due date of June 1st, but we also recognize that programs are juggling a lot of different variables right now, and you may not be able to make that decision before June. So if you're interested, let us know. We can certainly be flexible with that deadline. And we are committed to offering this professional development. So while it's originally designed as a hybrid opportunity with some face-to-face institutes and some online work, we are intending to move forward no matter what. Even if we are not able to gather in person in the fall, we'll be finding ways to deliver this virtually. So please contact Christine Kelly with any questions about what this professional development involves. Let's go to the next slide. And then finally, just a reminder that now more than ever, it's really important that you open that MNABE Connect newsletter that's coming into your inbox every Tuesday. This is our primary delivery method for letting you know about what PD is available, and there are new things being added every week and really every day. And some excellent articles have been coming out the past few weeks highlighting how different teachers in different settings are managing to teach at a different distance, some great instructional resources, looking at the different resource collections on the Atlas website, information about how to expand distance learning. So really worth the few minutes just to scan that and see what you can use to make your lives easier right now. The next slide. So let's just pause actually for a moment before we get into the staff and volunteer data in SID. See just a question here that I want to address around the CCRS Instructional Leadership Summit, asking whether it will be helpful and applicable for one-room schoolhouse settings. Yes, definitely. Regardless of the setting you're working in, if you have multiple staff in your program and you are one of the people tasked with supporting others in your program around the standards, definitely a helpful thing to participate in. Okay, Brad, do you want to talk through some of the information that we're now asking programs to put into SID?
Absolutely. Thanks, Astrid. So we want to remind folks that starting July of 2020, all AD program staff and volunteers will need to be entered into SID. Some of the benefits of that is you'll be able to generate your federal Table 7 reports from SID. It will hopefully give us statewide a more accurate picture of our state AD workforce, which we get questions from many of our stakeholders on. And we also know that many programs, if not most programs, have already been doing this. So just to kind of remind folks about who needs to be in SID, this would be instructors, administrators, and support staff that are paid by state and federal ABE funds. We also would like you to include your ABE program volunteers. Some of the data elements that that are required include name, staff type, hourly type, education, staff certification for teachers, demographics, and ABE experience at hire, specifically for staff, not for volunteers. Okay, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Astrid to talk about some of that staff training in SID.
Yes. So those of you who were at our fall manager meeting back in November, which seems like just a million years ago, you'll remember that we asked you for some feedback about the training options that were listed in SID. They were quite outdated and pretty limited. So based on that feedback and feedback from our statewide professional development committee, we have updated those training, the list of training options in SID to better reflect what's currently being offered. You'll see that the outdated options cannot be now selected from the drop-down list, but they will show up in your staff history if you had entered those previously. You also have the option to enter special locally delivered training if you want to track that. And we've added a new history group specifically around professional development events like Summer Institute or the regionals. And the staff training reports will be available later this year for you to use in tracking what training your staff have participated in. And if you have any questions about how to enter that information in SID, you can contact the Urban Planet staff. Go to the next slide, Brad. So we do have one report that is available now that allows you to get a snapshot of all of the trainings that your staff have participated in when, and for each staff, a list of trainings they have done. And you are able to export this to Excel to sort by date or other criteria. So this could be a really useful tool for those of you who are, for example, working on your narratives or as you're going into a new year to determine which staff have completed required training, which staff need that training, and how you're going to prioritize your training dollars. But we just want to emphasize that you need to be putting the data in order to get the data out. So encourage you to take advantage of those updated listings and use SID as a tool for tracking the training that your staff are participating in. We also have some updates, if you go to the next slide, Brad, to the volunteer training options that are listed in SID. So previously, those of you who were using this feature will know that there were two options: primary training and supplementary training, which were very general terms, and we wanted to update those to more accurately reflect the trainings that are offered. So the new training options, Brad, if you'll advance here, match what is currently offered through Literacy Minnesota. So the two 12-hour pre-service trainings, the two classroom volunteer trainings, and then an ongoing training option as well for you to track what ongoing training your volunteers are receiving each year. So for each of these, you can enter additional information such as the provider and the format and the topic in the comments section. Go to the next slide. And we will be releasing some volunteer training reports later this year. So let's
Excellent.
take questions.
Thank you, Astrid. We do have a question from Caroline about the volunteer report that is due to Literacy Minnesota, formerly known as the Minnesota Literacy Council, and where's the link for that? I was actually trying to type in the chat response and I realized I do not have a link to that.
Okay, I can, if anyone from Literacy Minnesota is on and can pull that up quickly, that would be great. Otherwise, if you give me just a minute, I can put that link in the chat if it is currently available.
I was looking through our guest list, and I don't think we have any participants currently on from the Minnesota or from Literacy Minnesota. We have another question from Julie Fitek. She's asking, does the DL Online Basics course give a completion certificate when an individual finishes it? And my understanding is, yes, there's a CEU certificate that can be emailed to. But I think you have to email them in order to obtain that CEU certificate, correct?
I believe so.
And by then, the people, it's the final lesson in the course, if I recall correctly.
And Tom Citron-Heisem, if you know the answer to that offhand, how someone gets that certificate, you could put that in the chat. That would be great.
We have a good question from Kirsten Fugelstadt as well. How far back in time are we expected to go to enter the various PD events or trainings that staff have participated in?
So that would be a local decision. We, at this point, are not requiring programs to enter the staff training options. We're strongly encouraging you to do that. And we are looking at, in the future, at implementing some basic staff training requirements that would require ABE staff to have completed a few of our core trainings within a certain period of time after hire. So at this point, I would make the decision about how far back based on just what you need to know locally to make decisions about PD participation. So if you have that information in another format that's readily available to you, I think my recommendation would just be to put it in for this year or from this point forward, rather than trying to backdate a lot of information.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense, Astrid. We also, Tom Citron-Heisem did respond to Julie Fitek in her request about DL Online Basics. If you didn't get that notice about CEUs, you can also email Catherine.Grady@SPPS, stands for St. Paul Public Schools.org, to obtain a certificate.
Okay, and I have the information about the volunteer report. It is due on Friday, July 31st, 2020. It looks like the report is not yet linked in the website, but I'm going to send, or I will post the link to where the information about that report is on the Literacy Minnesota website. And it looks like Kirsten Collins from Literacy Minnesota is on with us. Kirsten, if you have any additional information about when that report will be available on the website, if you can chat that in, that would be helpful.
Oh, excellent. I didn't see her there earlier. Perfect. Thank you, Astrid. We do have another question from Jill, and Jill's asking, to avoid duplication, can the state link with SID and record who and what training our staff attends, and then it's automatically filed with our consortium? I can kickstart that answer if you want,
Yep.
Astrid.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we talked about that option with SID and having our support network providers be able to kind of automatically upload participation lists. The technical details of uploading those lists and monitoring that, or not monitoring that, but just trying to enable that technologically was beyond our scope, and it would have been a tremendous cost, and we weren't quite sure if SID was able to do that. Urban Planet had a lot of hesitation and said that this was not possible. So unfortunately at this point, as a consortium, you and your own staff will need to be entering your own professional development and trainings into SID.
Yeah, I think that's the most efficient process. Another question about entering volunteers on SID starting July 1st. Do we want just their information or track the hours as well? I think that the requirement is, and Brad, you can chime in on this, is just at a minimum to put the volunteers in there. I think their thinking was that if the hours were tracked in there, you would be able to generate that information for your annual report from SID.
I agree. Yep, we need to make sure that we have the demographic information, but we don't necessarily need the hours in SID for that purpose. If you are doing the hours in a different way, that is not required on our end. Kirsten Fugelslav also wondered if various providers would be able to send consortium a master list of all the trainings and all the participants, so that then they could hand enter those at the end of the year into SID. And again, at this point, what I would say is that would kind of be a major project for a lot of our support network providers. I don't know that we have the capability of doing that at this point in time.
Yes, I would say we don't have the capacity to do that, and frequently I think that could get quite complicated with registration lists not actually matching attendee lists. So I think it's easiest if people track their own professional development, which they need to do anyway for their CEUs. Any further questions? Maybe we'll move on, Brad, and then if we can certainly stay on with other questions that come in.
Sounds good. We want to remind folks about our upcoming MN ABE webinars. We have the ABE and COVID-19 updates on April 30th from 10 to 11:30. We also have our next web chat with MN ABE, which will be our grant application workshop. That'll be Wednesday, May 6th, from 1 o'clock until 2:30 in the afternoon. We want to thank all of you for participating today, and you can see the link here to find the resources for this session as well as our other sessions, including the grant application workshop videos. And we'll open it up now for additional questions. We can also stop the recording at this point in time if we are still recording.